Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on embedding intelligence to drive healthcare business outcomes. I'm super excited to have you all here, and I'm looking forward to all the amazing conversation we are going to have today. I am Shrutapa Ghosh, and I'm the Senior Manager for the Data Science team at CTS Tech, and I'll be your moderator for today. So the healthcare sector is grooming with the implementation and the utility of data science, AI, RPA to increase operational excellence and improve patient outcomes. This game-changing technology is making the biggest impact in exploring the medical field, and CTS Tech is poised to be one of the leading players in this field. Today, our first panelist is Manisha Bafna. She is the Vice President Data Science and Consulting at CTS Tech. Manisha has got more than 17 years of invaluable experience in healthcare consulting and technology services across the payer, provider, and medical technology companies. Over the years, she has helped various healthcare companies adapt AI and data science application. So we'll be hearing from her expert opinion on how healthcare companies can use the embedded intelligence framework to drive smart business decisions. Our second panelist for today is Rinkan Ningtaujam, practice lead RPA at CTS Tech. Rinkan has more than 15 years of very enriching experience in business process automation, process excellence, and process consulting. Rinkan will share with us his valuable insights on how companies can adapt embedded intelligence framework with minimum disruption to the current business processes. A few do's and don'ts for today's session. Request all of you to please be on mute, and please feel free to type in your questions in the question section of the webinar. So we have reserved the last 15 minutes of the session to answer as many questions as possible. So let's start the session and let's welcome the panelists for today. Thank you, Manisha and Rinkan, for joining us. Looking forward to a very exciting session and discussion.
Thank
Over
you,
to you,
Sutapa.
Manisha.
Thank you, Sutapa. And I hope you guys can hear me okay.
Yes, Manisha, perfectly.
All right. So thank you for that great introduction, Sutapa. And, before we move into the core agenda of this conversation, I thought of sharing some status on, the current adoption of data science, of artificial intelligence, and where we are. And I have some report from Gartner of 2018 and 2019. Consider this as an audience, as organizations who are trying to, develop artificial intelligence engagements and projects, and they had planned to go live in 12 months of time. So there was 23% of this audience who wanted to go live by 2019. Only 14% were able to meet that number in 2018 itself. However, if you look at the 2019 status of this audience, right, only 5% of this audience actually scaled the AI adoption, and they could meet their deadlines. Now, there were various reasons why this happened, and moderator, if you can go to the next slide. You'd see that there were few challenges, right? So there were challenges of fear of unknown. There were challenges of finding a great starting point to focus on the consumption. There were challenges of, having a matured enterprise level strategy, because of which, these organizations couldn't really scale their AI ML projects and couldn't successfully adopt to the development of the AI ML engagements that they have. If we go to the next slide. So why did this happen? And what I'm going to share is a few observations on why we think that the organizations fail to adopt data science or RPA and not scale, right? So everybody's excited, and there's one of the Gartner survey, I'm quoting the survey, that by 2024, 50% of AI investments will be quantified and linked to specific key performance indicators to measure their return on investment, which means by 2024, whatever investments that the organizations have done over a period of these 5 years, right, they would want to start seeing the results, right? They would want to see that, those KPIs where they could look at their return on investment. Now, there are, multiple traps, in my opinion, where, organizations are failing to adopt, data science and RPA. When I say adopt, it's not about developing the algorithms. I think organizations are pretty mature today, where they know that they have to develop algorithms, they have the expertise, they have the skills. However, how do you take it to the next level, right? So, the very first trap, which is the sweet spot of complexity, right? So building excessively complex machine learning algorithms instead of basic analytical or pre-built models. So you would want to use machine learning instead of cognitive RPA. You're not thinking of all this in the continuum of automation, right? So that's your first trap of balancing your complexity versus the value that you will get out of your data science investments. The second trap is, often there's a siloed input. So business units or decision makers are not aligned to what is the choice of automation, optimization that is needed to enhance the customer experience. So some are thinking RPA, some are thinking I can do with tool-based automation, whereas some want to build cool algorithms, right? So the units are not aligned to the business goals. And the third trap, which is the home run trap, right? So I think many of you probably are aware of the baseball game, and a lot of times you win by taking a lot of singles rather than just waiting to hit a home run all the time, right? Or a sixer, as we call it in cricket. Now, high impact projects are exciting, but don't underestimate the value of continuous improvement and lots of quick wins, right? Which you can get by taking singles. A hammer trap. Now, this is very similar to the silo trap. It's the classic hammer and nail, right? Where you have the hammer now and you're looking for the nail. So, deep learning, and you know that, I can very well build deep learning algorithms, but is that what you're looking for? Is that what your business use case is, right? So, often you fall into that trap. The other trap is baby out of the bath trap, right? So, don't try to eliminate a good user experience by incorporating data science algorithms or RPA, right, or any sort of automation, right? So while you are building these algorithms, you have to focus on user experience, hide the details and optimize the workflow such that for the users, the underlying algorithms are almost invisible, right? Their experience is such that they're able to utilize the outcomes, improve the productivity, and provide quality care at low cost. The final trap, at the end of the day, the goal of smart automation is really to improving productivity and decision making of humans. If your algorithmic recommendations are not explainable or make it harder for the people involved, right, then they're doomed to fail. All solutions, like particularly powerful capabilities like machine learning, deep learning algorithms, right? They need to be human centric, right? So never keep the human out of the loop. Start your ideation process with your business teams first, with your users first. So that's the last trap. And let me tell you how. Obviously, we also went through these traps, right? And let me tell you how we have tried to overcome these traps, and that's the main agenda of this conversation. Uh, what we did to overcome the traps was started using embedded intelligent principles, right? So this is a framework that we built over a period of years, and what it really means is it's basically how do you empower your existing users to make better decisions by prompting smart automation, data science, RPA, with minimal changes to process frameworks and system investments, right? So, how do you really do this? Right? So, for us, this was based on three basic principles of embedded intelligence. Okay, so again, variety of traps that we got into, but gradually we applied these three principles. Where now we're making, we are very successful in adopting artificial intelligence, helping organizations to scale beyond proof of values. So how we did that, right? So the very first principle is focus on rapid prototypes, right? So there is this mindset shift, so in the strategy. So while you're building rapid prototypes, focus on the value rather than just the concept, right? So I may want to try some cool algorithm, I may want to try some cool technology, right? But what is important is to build those prototypes which demonstrate value rather than developing something which can't be scaled or which doesn't fit into your organization's technology roadmap. The second principle is to focus on customer and end user experience. So avoid disrupting the existing interfaces, right? So the baby out of the bath trap. Don't avoid don't disrupt the existing interfaces unnecessarily, right? Hide the complexity in the background and ensure that the customer experience is improved. The third principle is, be ready for constant corrections. Data science engagements in nature, by nature, are, such where you will have constant corrections to do. So have that patience. Take up a complex project after ideation, but don't be in a hurry to operationalize. Don't be in a hurry to take off, right? Without getting the SME feedback. Be ready for multiple iterations before you take off. With that, what I'll do is, I'll request my colleague Rinkin to actually walk you through the framework, right? So I explained the principles to you. Rinkin will walk you through the a sophisticated framework that we are using today, and then we'll also be happy to walk you through a few scenarios where we have applied these principles. Over to you, Rinkin.
Thank you, Manisha. Good morning and good evening to everyone. Moderator, if you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So Manisha talked a lot about the traps, the principles that we have. But from an organization's perspective, what is the key goal? The goal is to drive business outcome, be it financial, operational, clinical, or the customer success in terms of the experience. But what we've been seeing is, in order to achieve these business outcomes, there are constraints in the existing processes, starting with the processes not being standard, the workflows are not standard, the systems that we are using there are challenges with the systems that we are using, a lot of complexity in the way we operate, the operational challenges, the domain expertise limited to the business SMEs who are working on that process, limited view of what happens upstream or downstream of these processes. Now we'll have to ask a question in terms of how do we play this constraint to our advantage? The answer to that, after repeated working with customers and identifying this, what would be the best way to handle this is bringing in tools and technologies, what we are calling it as embedded intelligence driven services, which entails process mining, smart automation, data science, analytics, and finally monitoring and management. We'll talk about in brief about all of these in the upcoming slides. But what's also critical is to accelerate in this journey. In order to accelerate, we cannot be building everything from the scratch, which it's not an idle situation. What we need to do is we need to start leveraging pre-built components into our overall solution. We're not saying that all these solutions, all this technology would fit everywhere that we're working on. But what we've been able to do is start identifying some common reusable accelerators which could be applicable in the context of healthcare value chain. Be it starting from NLP models, if you have to look at population health models, looking at RPA bots, which are reusable at any process or any business process that we're trying to automate. So it's critical to look at those components as well when we go into this journey. And finally, to tie all these things together, we need to bring in our technology engineering services, starting with AI engineering, which is to look at how do we make our systems more smarter? How do we go about operationalizing our models? How do we monitor them? Then the second component in terms of data management, which is very critical in the kind of the framework that we're working on, because it's the data that we're going to consume. The data has to be right, has to be good for us to work on it. So data management plays a critical part again. And then interoperability, looking at the perspective of how my applications and my tools are going to interact. They have to communicate well. So therefore, there's another element that we'll talk about a little later in terms of selecting the right technology is also one of the critical elements there. So all these things tied together is where we would have to start looking at the process from the perspective of bringing in and embedding intelligence into my process. Now, we may think that all these technologies that we're talking about here is something which we know and people have worked on it. But with the kind of framework that we have built, it's where we are tying all these things together. What has happened is people have tried process mining, people have tried smart automation, people have tried data science, but everything was in siloed. We need to bring it together and complement each other by using the right services to drive the business outcome. Now, while the moderator can please move to the next slide, please. While embedded intelligence needs an exploratory mindset, as Manisha talked about in the home run trap, the only way is to have a continuous improvement methodology. Organizations need to build their innovation with a factory mindset. This is the broad framework that we advocate, what we see on the screen now. It brings in different components, starting with process discovery. We observe, discover the gaps continuously. That's where we bring in the process mining tools. We don't want to solely rely on the manual process wherein we go consult a business SME and try to map out the process. But a lot of time, there are multiple variations which occurs in the process which is missed out. So we bring in process mining, which consumes the event logs, which any of the applications that we work on is generating as of date, consume that and help us in terms of drawing out the right process. And in turn, also help us in letting us know where the bottlenecks are or where the roadblocks are and what kind of an intervention can be brought in to streamline those processes. The next element is the process design. The language that we prefer is the business process modeling and Notion, wherein the physical process as well as the analytical flow can be brought in. It's also critical in the journey because we want to optimize our process to run in a more efficient and a more productive way. Then comes the point of selecting the right technology. We don't want it to be in a state wherein we bring in a tool which is not compatible with the applications that we are working. But most of the tools that is available in the market today does not have any constraint, but we don't want to land up in a situation like that. So it has to be guided by the complexity versus value equation that Manisha talked about. Selecting the right tool for its compatibility and ease of use for the people is for the user is it's another critical element in the journey. Then the first principle that we talked about, prototyping, is a common terminology when we work on it, when we work on any project. But what we are recommending is a proof of value, not a proof of concept. Proof of value from the point that this will scale and the realistic ROI can be achieved, not just from a technology validation standpoint. And then we move into operationalization. Now we've gone ahead, done a prototyping. We know that the solution is going to work. We start implementing the solution, validate it. Then comes a point wherein we have to scale this. We have to industrialize it. We have to continuously enhance, because the kind of environment that we work on, which is highly regulated, process changes, application changes are inevitable. So we'll have to continuously enhance and maintain our solution. We'll have to look at ways how we can bring in serviceability as a part of our maintenance and support framework. Can we have elements of self-healing the solution, self-learning? Can the solution by itself go ahead and make changes in the whole solution? I mean, in terms of the code, can it make those changes? Can it go ahead and make some, let's say that that application needs a reset? How do we, does it need to come into a support team, or whether the solution itself can handle it? So those kind of things has to be looked in, because we want to ensure that the process is running in a tandem, in a more efficient way. And finally, the key goal that the business is driving, which is the business outcome, we need to tie it back, the business objective back to the business outcome, marrying the business matrix with statistical measures and performance measure. It's not just about all the maths of the algorithms that we have developed. With that, I'll hand it over to Manisha. We'll talk about very specific case studies on those three principles that we talked about, that Manisha talked about, and give you an example. I'll give you this perspective of how did we go about solving some of these customer issues by bringing in by bringing in those three principles in this case studies. Over to you, Manisha.
Sure. Thank you, Rinkan. I'll request moderator to move to the next screen. Thank you. So, time to cut the theory and, speak about some real life examples. Okay. So, I'll walk you through three of the examples where we tried to apply the principles. And again, I'll be honest, we were not 100% successful. Few scenarios we could, take off, and, we adopted AI and help organizations scale, apply the algorithm in real world. So this is one such example. So this was for one of the customer profile is of a leading provider of radiology solutions. They have the risks and facts viewers. They have all the modalities to support endoscopy, ultrasound, etc. Now, the obvious users of their applications, radiologists, specialists, the specialist healthcare providers, they use this application, and their experience before applying embedded intelligence was that the radiologists and specialists were spending considerable amount of time in getting to the right image for diagnosis. So they'll be doing patient searches, they'll be looking for the first name, last name. Now there are so many images that come up, then they have to go through certain filters to get to the right image, right? So they are burned out any which ways with a huge backlog of images for interpretation and providing accurate diagnosis. And to add to their concerns, right? There's so many images, they have to go through so many filters. So there was a need for intelligent patient search. And when we got engaged with the customer, right, we applied few of the processes that Rinkel was talking about when he was explaining the framework, right? So we thought we should be looking at the processes a little more in detail. Now, while we were doing the process mining and we used certain BPMN tools to understand their workflows better, we wanted to make sure that any which ways the physicians, the healthcare providers, the radiologists are any which ways burned out by a lot of these administrative tasks and this healthcare applications. We don't really want to change their experience, right, in terms of using that interface, using the viewers. We don't want to add new screens, we don't want to add new panels to make their search more intelligent. However, how do we make sure that the workflow experience is better, and at the same time it is much faster and much intelligent? By that, what I mean is, the moment a radiologist or a specialist is going to enter or look for the patient, right, look for the first name and the last name, in the background we applied some NLP algorithms and we looked for the most relevant image of that particular patient through NLP. And we prioritize the list of images that the radiologist and physicians should look at, right? So if there's an acute patient, if there's a patient which is, probably having chronic issues, right? Or the patient is an acute patient and requires immediate attention, right, for diagnosis and interpretation, then why don't bring up those images for that particular patient that the provider was looking for, right? And then at the same time, applied prioritization of the images, and ran intelligent search on the patient's external EHR records, look for alerts on allergies, on drug interactions, so that the provider doesn't have to, keep switching applications, right? And they get a 360 view of the patient right on the viewer. Now, what this really helped was obviously, improve the diagnostic time, because now the physicians can spend time on what they're actually meant to write. They have all the information of the patient handy. They, in no time, obviously, faster, and, they get the longitudinal record of the patient, and the burnout is reduced, right? So, and they can, make accurate and prioritized diagnosis. Now, again, right, we're not really trying to replace the physician's expertise on interpretation, but we're making sure that they have all the information handy and at no time, right? So that they can spend enough time on accuracy and diagnosis. So we made sure that we did not change the interface. We hid the complexity behind the screens, and we improved the patient experience. Sorry, we improved the provider experience. If you can go to the next screen, it just explains how we applied BPMN. So this was we're just giving you a high-level view of their application. They had an enterprise viewer. There was some patient search functionality, and we embedded intelligence right on the search service that you see, which was already present, and we applied some intelligent touch points of prioritization of NLP algorithms, and then we bought that and we integrated the EHR data, and we got the longitudinal view of the record of that particular patient right on the viewer in no time. If we go to the next screen, this is another example of claims adjudication. And here, the customer is a leading managed care organization. They have about 5 million subscribers as we speak, and unfortunately, a lot of their claims operations team, right, they're actually working on manually adjudicating a lot of claims, right? So almost 2 million suspended claims that they receive every month. They have been, they were manually adjudicating those claims, right? And the experience before applying embedded intelligence was that large volume of the suspended claims were getting adjudicated manually to figure out if those need to be denied, if those need to be reprocessed. And obviously it led to a lot of manual errors, a lot of rework, and not a great end user experience for the operations team, right? Given that it's money, it's obviously, there was no room for error, but at the same time, the reality is that they were doing this. So when we started this process, right, here we had a slightly different way of approaching the problem. So we realized it's a complex project. We realized that it's not going to be very as easy as implementing some level of automation. We thought, let's just get the audience involved. Let's just get the operations team involved. We did a lot of stakeholder interviews, and we implemented some attribute models even before we could, work through the actual model of auto adjudication and prioritizing the claims, classifying the claims. We went through multiple iterations. The project went on for about 6 months, even before we could touch into the first real life operation and productionization of the model. We went through several iterations. We wanted to make sure that the operations team feel comfortable about the classification of these claims. So what we did was, we didn't intend to auto-adjudicate the entire process, right? So we didn't want it to replace the manual expertise of adjudicating claims, but we looked at claims which were obvious candidates for auto-adjudication. We classified those claims. That was one of the AI touch point. We also applied RPA for certain automation of tasks which really do not require manual intervention. And once the RPA and classification touch points were implemented, we then implemented an algorithm to auto-adjudicate those obvious claims which do not require manual intervention. And that, by the way, optimized the staff effort to a certain, good level, where Today, when we have successfully operationalized the claims, successfully operationalized the auto adjudication model, the auto adjudication rate has increased from 72 to 90%. As we speak, they're getting an annual saving of about $5 million. And this whole operationalization and commercialization process was only successful because we got the audience involved right into the ideation process, right? So the operations team was, involved right when we were ideating the process. Stakeholder interviews was very, very important step in this entire process. And then obviously we went to multiple iterations, and today they're actually using this auto adjudication model for the claims which are good candidates, and the accuracy is at 90%. Another example of applying embedded intelligence on chronic care management. So this was actually an example where we did a great job of prototyping the solution, and we were we believe that we did a good job of making sure that we focus on the proof of value rather than proof of concept. Now let me walk you through the problem statement first, and then I'll explain the outcomes. So this customer is a leading provider of kidney dialysis services, and they work through a network of outpatient dialysis centers in the US and globally. And here the motivation for implementing, so here the customer had already figured out what they want to do. So the why was already figured out, right? So we didn't had to go through an initial ideation process and do the process mining or a work on PPMN. The customer had already identified that they want to identify high risk chronic kidney disease patients who are progressing towards end stage renal disease. So what this means is I have a certain patient cohort which is in the initial stages of kidney disease. However, I want to make sure that I would want to lengthen their progression to requiring dialysis, which is the last stage of this kidney disease, right? So I would want to lengthen that progression. Once a patient gets diagnosed by the initial stages of kidney disease, right? It's quite obvious that the patient is going to require dialysis after few years. However, a nephrologist would want to focus on lengthening that progression. So that's the motivation for identifying those high risk patients, right? So a lot of this ideation process was already done by the customer, and we tried to figure out what kind of insights could we derive for them. So our embedded intelligence findings were focused on what are those insights, what kind of data can we look at, right? And eventually we had initial challenges, right? So their clinical values were not standardized. There were missing values, and we figured out that when we implement this solution into their EHR, the customer may want to actually, get some potential alerts into their EHR. So this needs to be embedded into their workflow, right? So that was their motivation. Now, so what we did was we had variety of touch points. We looked at the data variables, we cleansed the data variables, we finalized some variables, we got the SMEs involved, and then eventually we built a prediction model where we classified patients who were progressors versus non-progressors for a certain patient cohort, and then we applied a risk score on that. And we predicted which of these progressors, how long would they take to reach to requiring dialysis. And then we gave them recommendations on how can they extend the progression, right? So we built a very good solution for them. However, if you could go to the next screen, this is a classic example where we could not take off. So we implemented the proof of value. We went through iterations where we got the SMEs involved. Now, eventually we built multiple use cases around this, right? So what we heard from the physicians, from the nephrologists was that, okay, great, you built something, but this tool needs to identify patients that need more focused attention. So they wanted more focused attention on a certain patient cohort. What about the non-diabetic patients? How do you, often those patients tend to be ignored and diabetic patients get more attention, obviously rightly so, because you're developing comorbidities, and diabetic patients are at risk of requiring that dialysis more probably more frequent than later, right? So they had concerns that yes, you are focusing on the diabetic patients, but what about the non-diabetic patient cohort, right? Others had some concerns around ability to identify a consistent pattern of abnormality. Few of them found out that, okay, although the evidence for this use case exists, but the doctors were still hesitant to use it, right? So the usability was in question. The data in the EHR, right? So missing data, non-standardized data, that's going to be a challenge. So the trust that this will work and this will function was, not really 100%, right? So although we achieved a good accuracy in our proof of value, but we couldn't take off because of data, because of belief that this will yield results, because of looking at variety of patient cohort, variety of data variables, etc., right? So the clinical insights were interesting, but how practical would that be in order to implement it, and how how much of consumption that we will get from variety of physicians was questionable. So those were few of the reasons why we could not take off. However, we learned our lessons, and we wanted to make sure that anytime we pick up another project of similar nature, we'll have variety of SMEs involved before we work through models. So those are a few examples where we applied the principle of rapid prototyping, we applied the principles of multiple iterations, we applied the principles of making sure that you're hiding the complexity and the user interface is not really changing a lot, right? So we've worked on a variety of those projects. I mean, in the interest of time, we only have 3 scenarios here. So if you could go to the next screen, I'll take a pause here and I'll request Rinkin to quickly summarize what were the key takeaways. I'm hoping that this session was useful and knowledgeable, and we'll take some questions once Rinkin summarizes the principles for us. Over to you, Rinkin. Thank you. All right. So I think Rinkin is facing some audio issues, so I'll actually make an attempt of summarizing the takeaways, right? So I think so. While you are, I'm sure a lot of you would recognize that those human traps do exist, right? Those variety of traps, it's human out of the loop, whether it's through um, working through scenarios where you already have a hammer and you're looking for the nail, right? So you already know that I want to build an algorithm, but I don't know the use case, right? So a lot of us face through those issues, go through those issues, right? And what we would suggest is focus on the proof of value. So think big, but start small and then scale, right? And try to have that mindset of building an innovation garage using the rapid prototyping methods. The second principle, obviously, avoid disrupting existing interfaces, right? And I'm a big fan of this principle, by the way. So initiate your ideation process with the business teams first. Right? So get the stakeholders involved right when you're ideating, right? Because they are the audience that will going to use your solution, right? And taking their feedback, understanding their pain points is very, very important. And while you're working through the ideation process and you're working through, prototyping your solution, right? Try to qualify and quantify your outcomes. So what kind of financial outcomes are you looking at? What kind of clinical excellence are you looking at, right? Try to see if those can be measured. Try to see that the ROI is something that you can really, it's practical and you can meet up for it. So focus on those while you're working through the ideation process. The third one, complex project, multiple iterations, guys, be ready, right? Data science projects are going to require constant corrections. Data, the data word in the data science, right? It's the magic word, and if you're able to go past that, you will be successful, right? So be ready for multiple iterations, be patient, go through those iterations. You'll have some constant corrections to be done. However, adopt the human-centered design principles, right? So focus on what is desirable, what is viable and what is feasible, right? So if you're able to do that, you'll be able to successfully, adopt AI and scale AI. So, guys, that's the end of the presentation for us today, and I hope this was useful. And if you have any further questions, you can obviously reach out to us. We're going to do multiple such series of workshops on variety of data science topics. How do you handle unstructured data? How do you manage medical devices better? Look at anomalies in the devices. How do you focus on balancing your data utility versus protecting your data while you're doing the research, right? So while you follow all your HIPAA guidelines, etc., right? So do reach out to us, watch the announcements for all the other upcoming webinars. And we could help you in a variety of areas. We could do rapid prototyping for you. We could help you assess, process mine your tool, process mine your workflows, etc. All right, so I'm going to take a
Yeah,
pause here, and Sutapa, I may request
yes.
you to, I don't know,
Yeah,
if you're
Manisha.
seeing some questions getting posted, to let
Yeah,
us
I
know.
can see quite a lot of questions coming up. And thank you, Manisha and Rinkan. It was a really enriching session. And I am sure all the attendees have gained good knowledge from here. So I'll try to take up a few questions because we have time. So I'll just go to the questions. I think there's a question for you, Manisha, that are the pre-built models readily accessible? And what is the level of customization required on these models?
So, I mean, the question is probably with respect to the framework that Rinkin was demonstrating,
Yes.
right? Uh, so yes, I mean, see, so we have a lot of partner ecosystem, and while we when we're doing process mining, and when we are focusing on what are those outcomes that the customer would be interested in, right? We also focus on what are the deadlines, right? So what are their immediate needs versus what are their long-term needs. And consciously we look to our partners who already have reusable models available, which can be quickly plugged in, with only one condition for our partners, that give us something which is quickly deployable and which would require less customization, making sure that the customer's experience is not compromised, and we're not changing too much on their technology stack, right? And the good news is, of lately, right, I mean, lot of technical organizations are already consciously thinking of Dockers, containers, right, which could be quickly deployed and integrated within the technology ecosystem. So these components are very easily, deployed and integrated into a customer's technology stack, given that they follow all the, modern principles of Dockerization and containerization of, their components.
Right. Thank you, Manisha. I'm not sure if Rinkan is there. Is Rinkan there
You
or
able to
you
hear
are there?
me?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
perfectly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so Rinkan, there are a few questions which maybe you can help us with. So there's a
Mhm.
question on how easy is it to maintain these solutions with so many components tied up together?
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you. Um, yeah, we like we said earlier, right? When we bring in these tools, it's not necessary that everything has to be brought in, right? It's again coming back to that the trap that we have, hammer trap, right? If you have this suits of products or suite of tools available to us, it's not necessary that we'll have to fit in everything. It's about relating it back to the framework that we talked about, looking at the right technology selection from an interoperability standpoint, from a compatibility standpoint, and from an ease of use standpoint. And finally, it also has to be cost effective. So when we bring in these tools and components, it's 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 not necessary to have everything in place. And also when we have this, when we stitch all of this together, we'll have to ensure that people who are managing and monitoring this are experts in this. A lot of time, in any typical scenario, we tend to have a lower end resources monitoring and managing it, but that cannot be a case in when we do a complete end to end transformation using this technology. The person has to have an understanding from both domain perspective and the technology stacks perspective. So with these two stitched together, we able to manage and maintain this solution. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, surely. Thank you so much, Rinkan. So I have one more question. I think maybe Manisha, if you can help us with this answer. So it says that if clients have already done their POCs in the past, how can CTS Tech help them in taking this forward?
Okay.
Manisha, can yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just processing the question. So if the clients have already done POCs in the past, how do we help them scale, right? And so that's exactly what we are trying to do with this with this framework, right? So, and in fact, this is a common situation that we have seen with a lot of customers, right? So they've developed a lot of proof of concepts. However, either they are challenged because now they don't know how to integrate that algorithm into their workflows, because obviously, right, while we have all the interoperability standards in place, right, uh, we still don't have standards to integrate artificial intelligence algorithms seamlessly into healthcare workflows. By that, what I mean is, if I have a worklist prioritization algorithm, uh, I don't have matured IHE profiles or XL7 standards to have that seamless integration, right? And that's one of the reason why organizations sometimes are challenged. However, obviously, there's room for custom integration, and there have been cases where the customers have built the algorithms, and because obviously, CTS Tech is obviously only focused on healthcare, and we help them build custom interfaces such that the algorithms can be very well integrated within their workflows, and obviously have a seamless experience for the users. So we've helped that customers do that. In fact, for one of the customer, we had built a cardiac, there was a model that we built. I can't diverge a lot of details here, but the model was to do with smart analyses of cardiac images, and we helped them integrate that into their imaging viewer. Again, we don't have standards available. In fact, CTS Tech has been working with the IHE folks to have an IHE profile, which is actually dedicated to integrating imaging workflows.
Okay.
I hope
I think we have
I think I tried to answer the question. Yeah, Sutapa.
Yeah, I think we have time to take a few more questions. Is that fine?
Okay.
Like, should we go ahead? Yeah. So one interesting question is, what kind of challenges do we foresee in making devices, technology, and platforms talk to each other? So the challenges which we see.
Let me try to answer that question. So, what kind of challenge do we foresee in making devices,
Making
technology,
device.
and platforms? Yes, actually, this is a very similar question to what I was answering, right? So, in the previous question. So, uh, uh, again, right, challenges are pretty much because we don't have those interop standards in place yet, when it comes to integrating machine learning algorithms, right? So we have seen challenges with respect to adoption, where okay, you build the algorithms, and however, my medical devices are probably not IoT enabled, or I would not really want to make any changes in the core functioning of the device just because I want to build an anomaly algorithm, for example, right? So the challenges are related to technology, related to adoption with respect to the users. However, again, right, going back to the principle of involving the stakeholders, making sure that we understand what are the pain areas, and eventually making choices which are viable and feasible, right? You need to make those viable and feasible choices when you're trying to get devices, technologies, and the stakeholders talk to each other.
Okay, that makes sense. I have a question for you, Rinkan. So how does the embedding intelligence incorporate with the UiPath RPA?
How does embedded intelligence incorporate with UiPath RPA? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So UiPath RPA can form as a component or the services that we talked about in the whole embedded intelligence framework. But having said that, these platforms, right, from RPA platforms like UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, this market leading platforms are also bringing out a concept called hyper automation. There's a very thin line between hyper automation and embedded intelligence. Hyper automation is more focused towards looking at the business process and bringing in automation on top of it, just pure play automation. Looking at they also have components of AI, ML, analytics built on top of it. Embedded intelligence, like we said, right, it's empowering the user to make smarter decision by ensuring that we make your system smarter, you may make your process smarter and more intelligent. So if you look at the set of tools which will be applicable on a hyper automation versus embedded intelligence, yes, there will be a similarity on it, but the intent of bringing in embedded intelligence versus hyper automation it's a little different. It's be looking at making your processes and systems more intelligent to make smarter decisions for the user and to drive business outcome. From an hyper automation standpoint, it's an element of driving a business outcome more from an efficiency or a productivity standpoint by bringing in automation tool. I'm not sure whether I was able to answer that question, but
yeah. I think
I
that
put it
was
across.
quite crisp. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Rinkan. I think I can take one or two more questions. So, Manisha, there's an interesting question. Do you have any performance measures for the solutions you build?
Okay, do you have any performance measures for the solutions you build? So I'm not sure if the question is with respect to the scenarios that I had walked through. So I'm assuming the question is with respect to that. I mean, most of our solutions, right, and obviously data science solutions will have performance measures, right? So the performance measures with respect to drift, with respect to accuracy. So for all of these, we do have, the key performance indicators, right, on what is the expected accuracy for the models that you're building. However, we do not really have standardized measures, right? So we're not a product company where we bring in a certain product and we promise for a certain accuracy, right? We're building models for our customers. Our customers own the IP, and depending on the problem statement, right? Maybe for a certain model, 60% accuracy is a great performance measure versus for the claims adjudication model that I had demonstrated, right? 90% is what the customer was expecting, right? So your performance measures for data science solutions would change, would vary depending on the type of use case and depending on what is desirable for that particular business goal, right? So for some 50% is great, but for some 90% is what I want, right? So it will change. It will never be a standard performance measure. Obviously, we'll have all the technical performance measures with respect to the data science solutions, right? Which is drift, any kind of AOC, etc., right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. I think I'll just take one last question, and Rinken, that's for you. So, given the healthcare domain regulatory aspects such as CFR 21, security risk, and licensing regimen, so is the reliance on open source stack worthy enough?
Yeah, very interesting question. Um, the solutions that we build comply to the regulation. We need the partners ecosystem that Manisha talked about. We ensure that they are compliant from an HIPAA standpoint or a 21 CFR standpoint. So, and the solutions from a product standpoint, or the model that we're going to be using, or the solution or the platform that we're going to be using as a part of the solution that we build, we'll have to ensure both the elements stay in place intact. From a perspective of the product, we ensure that those are compliant in terms of having ensuring that there are audit trails, there are traceability, there's login credentials, all that element is taken care as a part of the product. And from a solutioning standpoint, also we ensure that the product, the solutions are compliant to all the regulations, HIPAA, high trust, 21 CFR, all the compliance regulations. And it is it depends on the solution or the use case that we're trying to solve. If it is a medical device, we will comply to the medical device compliance regulations. If it is a life sciences, pharma, biopharma, we'll ensure that it's 21 CFR. Similarly, on the healthcare sector, HIPAA. So that's something which we cater to, and we ensure that. Therefore, it also becomes critical when we actually do this ideation with our customers to understand what kind of a regulation governs this particular use case. That's a study that we do as a part of our discovery as well.
Mhm. Okay. I'm sorry, but I couldn't take all the questions because there were like quite a few more. And in the interest of time, maybe we'll take up these questions and reply to these later. So we will be definitely looking forward for the upcoming sessions, and we hope to see you all again. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this session. And thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Manisha and Rinkin. It was a really, really wonderful session.